Thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me here this afternoon. I've got a few slides to run through. I can't see the comments, so we'll have a little go through and we can answer questions at the end. But if there's something really pertinent, someone can shout, and I'll stop and try and answer it. I've got a vague plan. I always have a vague plan, but we can always go off tangent, talk about neurodiversity, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. A couple of notes on disclosure and retention. What a lot of people still work within a medical model, and what we're trying to do, which is move to a scalable social model. And then if you are interested in what we do, a little couple of slides about who we are at the end. So, and I'm happy to share these slides with you guys, so don't worry too much about having to write everything down. So you're probably all aware neurodiversity is a naturally occurring difference in humans' neurocognition. So most people have neurotypical brains, and about 15 to 20% have what we call neurodivergent brains. And those brains are where we have pronounced differences between our strengths and our weaknesses. And I am dyslexic. I'm also dyspraxic. And I was diagnosed when I was at university, had a pretty awful time before my diagnosis, getting worse grades. Had my diagnosis, they put some pretty straightforward adjustments in place. And I always say that I flipped from basically I was about to be asked to leave my course to my final exam, being one of only two students that achieved a first within that final exam. So it was a very revolutionizing experience for me personally. I'm incredibly about making sure that everybody has the opportunities that are the same, whether you have a neurotypical or a neurodivergent brain. So here at Genius Within, we talk about people having specialisms. So if you think about the neurodivergent brain having big differences between things we find easy and things that we find quite difficult, we call those specialist thinkers. So I'm very strong in areas of verbal communication and not so great in areas of self-organizing and literacy. People who have got neurotypical brains, they do also have things that they're better and find more difficult, but the differences between those are much, much smaller, and there's that teal line, and we call those people generalist thinkers. And really, if you're running a team, you need a great combination of specialist thinkers and generalist thinkers to get the most out of your teamwork. In terms of the prevalence in society, generally it's considered to be around 15 to 20%. There's lots of statistics around there, and we talk about neurotypes, which are the coloured bubbles, but we also talk about mental health, learning disability, and acquired neurodivergence. And they're not normally considered within the whole range of experience. And acquired neurodivergence is really around when people experience a change during their life. And it's really important when we think about our working populations, because we're not the same. We're not the same person when we start our working life, and we have different things that happen to us and happen in our life stages that mean that we might have a different executive function experience. It could be the menopause, it could be depression, it could be having small children and not very much sleep, it could be having an illness or experiencing a treatment that causes you to have a mental deficiency or a challenge during that time of your treatment. What we do is we position everything from a position of strength. So you'll see these bubbles, these coloured bubbles here, and they have got the things that we think are great about each neurotype. And you'll notice that they cross over, and they cross over purposefully, because most people will have more than one area or trait of one of these neurotypes that they experience. So for me, I mentioned being comfortable and confident at public speaking, also visual thinking, creativity, and my dyspraxia also helps with my verbal skills and my empathy and intuition. And other people have other skills, and we cross over right across this whole group of neurotypes. There's lots of talk at the moment about the size of the population and is it growing? And we get asked a lot about this. Why are so many people suddenly coming forward? What's happening? What is the size of the situation? Now, if the waiting list, so first of all, the NHS only counts waiting lists for ADHD, for autism diagnosis. It doesn't count it for ADHD, and you can't get an adult diagnosis once you're outside of the learning system for dyslexia. But if the autism waiting list was a city, it would be bigger than Oxford. So that's huge. There's a waiting time of 281 days on average. People wait, often we hear a number of years. We know that prevalence studies show that ADHD really indicates that there's over 2 million people, but only a small amount of those have got access to medication, and not everybody wants or needs medication, but it is an indicative area that shows the size of the population. There's only 2 locations in the whole of the UK that can diagnose you with Tourette's, one in London and one in Edinburgh. And as I said, dyslexia and dyspraxia are not typically diagnosed within the NHS system outside of higher or education. So it is a difficult picture for achieving a diagnosis as an individual. And companies that we work for are questioning their ability to be able to provide cost-effective diagnosis for their staff. And that's where we start to talk about, well, what do we need to do? Because at the moment, we're all in status waiting for these diagnoses, and people are struggling while they're waiting. And this just doesn't seem right to us. And this started a process of us wanting to do something at scale to support individuals. And there's a big area of intersectionality as well when we talk about neurodiversity. A neurodivergent person who also intersects with another marginalised or area of D&I can suffer what we call double disadvantage. So, for example, girls are less frequently diagnosed, especially in ADHD. The diagnostic criteria has actually changed for ADHD. So young children didn't get diagnosed, girls, and those are women now in their adulthood, it's the largest group of adult diagnosis is women in their 40s at the moment, because they could not get diagnosed. The diagnostic criteria wasn't able to diagnose them when they were children. They're often misdiagnosed with anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. Girls who have repeated hyperactivity, it can be quite small, hair twiddling, pen flicking, all can be considered to be something that is a hyperactive indicator. It's not just little boys throwing chairs around a classroom. Some of those things can be much smaller, and therefore they get missed. We know that there's a really high rate of neurodivergence in transgender communities. We don't know why. Generally, it's an under-researched area. Typically, neurodiversity generally is very under-researched, but that crossover in particular is. We know that people marginalised by poverty, race, and ethnicity are more likely to be missed as being neurodivergent, and often not believed. You know, if we just push back a slide before and talk about the challenge of getting a diagnosis, if you're black or brown and you don't have a diagnosis, the chances are people won't believe that you've got the neurodivergent condition. We're often told that they're instead believed to be disobedient, or lazy, or not wanting to participate in the same way, when actually it could be something completely different. And intersectional marginalisation leads to double and triple masking, which is exhausting. If you are constantly having to check how you behave and what you speak when you're at work, it's absolutely unsurprising that we have higher rates of burnout for neurominorities that are living with an intersectional marginalisation between neurodiversity and another area of their life. We love research, so we look at research, we read research, we commission research, and we do research ourselves. So there's a few slides here with some research, and there's sources on all of the slides. This is the neurodiversity in business research that the charity commissioned the Birkbeck Centre to do. So this is the Birkbeck Centre for Research into Neurodiversity at Work. It is the only centre dedicated to this research in the UK. So what this shows you is when you go into a business and you ask people, how do you help somebody who might say, I've got ADHD? The first thing that often businesses say to us is, well, we don't know, because they don't tell us. So the research here is talking about why they don't disclose. And the biggest area is stigma. So that stigma and that shame is still very prevalent in communities that feel that they can't say that they have a particular neurotype because they'll get passed over for a promotion. They're worried about stigma from their boss, which is the first one. Sorry, it's fallen off the line. They're worried about stigma from their colleagues. They don't think anybody else knows enough about it, so there'll be just myths thrown at them. So, you know, if they've got ADHD, they think they're just going to fidget all day and etc. They do know about some supports, but to be honest, they just don't think they'd be very helpful for them personally. Or they did ask for support and they just didn't get any. And another research study that we've looked at comes from Disability Business Forum, which was called the Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey of 2023. And that also backed this point that getting adjustments is really hard. So you often have to disclose, and then you have to ask. And if you ask, you have to keep asking. So even when you keep asking, on average, it took a year for people to get the adjustments they were asking for. And even after that period, many people felt that there was still problems and a lack of support. So 56% said that there were still disability-related barriers after they'd gone through the process. Nearly 60% said they've got to be assertive. So you've got to ask, well, you know, when you're perhaps not doing as well as you could at work because you feel that you're not able to perform at your best, it's unlikely to be in line with somebody who feels particularly assertive and confident. So you needing to do that is really hard, a hard challenge for the individual. And the individual also has to initiate and keep pushing the process. So nearly 80% said they had to keep pushing for it. So it feels like it's quite hard to get adjustments. It feels like asking for adjustments is difficult for the person. And it feels like businesses are finding it hard to give the right support. They may want to, but they don't know how to. They don't know what support would be useful. And the other thing that we looked at is, well, okay, what if you don't do anything at all? What happens then? I mean, we know there's legal ramifications, but, you know, perhaps that won't happen. Perhaps someone will just leave, because if you put no accommodations in place, what this pie chart is telling you is the purple and the teal together are very likely to leave and likely to leave. So no accommodations at all. 50% of your workforce walk out the door. Now, of neurodivergent workforce, sorry. Now, the average turnover rate in the UK is about 25%. So you're doubling your chance of having that person leave. And we know how expensive it is to recruit and retain talent. And so having people that you want to work at their best leaving your organisation seems a shame for the organisation and for the person. Because look what happens if you put tailored accommodations, if you find out what will support the person and you're able to put it in place. The exact opposite happens. So if the grey 50% are now very unlikely to leave. And if you add in the orange, unlikely to leave, again, you're nearly at 3/4. So you're nearly 3 times more likely to keep them in your workplace if you put tailored accommodations in versus our average turnover rate for businesses in the UK. That's huge. That's massive. And if you put in the numbers of what it costs you to hire people, the ROI of putting a tailored accommodations in place starts to look very positive, especially if those accommodations are low cost or free, which I have a ton of data says they absolutely normally are. for the speed of today, I can't go through all of those, but I've got a bunch of other stats that say, so all I'd say is, whatever the cost is of putting things in place, it could be flexible schedules, it could be noise cancelling headphones, it could be not always being the note taker in a room, it could be being able to change the position of your desk, not physically move it, but sit at a different desk to do a different type of work. All of those things to work at their best, or feel that they really struggle to be able to do their best work. And so really what happens at the moment, and where we've historically existed, is a medical model. So very often what would happen is somebody would express that they had a difficulty, and they would be sent for some level of assessment. So that might be a workplace needs assessment or a diagnostic normally. Now, we know that this pyramid is telling us is that the cost of putting that in place is high. So a diagnostic assessment is very expensive, and there's very long waits. We've just talked about the ones that are in the NHS, but even in the private sector, many organisations that offer a clinical diagnosis are shutting their waiting lists. If you have a workplace needs assessment, also depends on your provider, but it's going to cost you many high hundreds of pounds. We often start there. That base layer that we're talking about, that's hidden cost. That's the cost of what we talked about before, of people not even being able to disclose and just underperforming because they don't have simple supports in place. That's huge. That's unknown because people aren't coming forward with it. But when we do put adjustments in place, we tend to start in the medical model with the most expensive one. And you know what? We've been doing this for 14 years. Nancy, our founder, Nancy Doyle, has been doing it for her whole career of 25 years. And the startling thing that we found is most of the time, most people, regardless of the diagnosis and neurotype they have, struggled with the same 4 executive functions: communication, time management, organisation skills, and memory and concentration. Doesn't matter whether you have a diagnosis or you don't have a diagnosis, these are the typical areas of executive function in your working memory, which is your ability to hold information whilst doing something else at the same time, is really struggling if you have a neurodivergent brain. The other thing to look at is the underlying impact of stress and wellbeing support. And very often, if someone is struggling at work, they get triaged into an EAP or counselling support. And we know that this need for stress and wellbeing support has grown from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic by 30% within this community. However, what we would say is, if you are a neurodivergent person who's very stressed at work because you are struggling with your communication, time management, organisational skill, and memory and concentration, you are going to be stressed. But dealing with the stress through lots of different techniques isn't going to deal with the underlying issue. And often what happens is a neurodivergent person gets triaged into that line of support, chew through many, many hours, feel worse about themselves because actually it's not helping, because we're not dealing with the underlying situation. But just remember, before we go on, these 4 areas, the commonalities, because this is a really key point. And what we've been trying to find a solution to. So we've got neurodivergent people turning up in the workplace in many more numbers than they have been before. We've just looked at the fact they have very similar difficulties, regardless of their diagnosis. We understand that there are people who've got acquired neurodivergence that comes from things like perimenopausal, menopausal women, long-tail COVID, depression, sleep issues, pain management, chronic fatigue, illness. And as an employer, we're not responsible for supplying a diagnosis, but we are responsible for providing the necessary adjustments to help these individuals to be able to deliver their work in the best way for them and the most productive way for you. So how do we do that without financially crippling the organisations that work for, but allowing the people to be able to flourish? And that's what we've been working on, to create a scalable, sociable model of support. So the social model looks at what we do around the person, not the person themselves. We don't ask the person to change. We look at the environment in which they work. And we flip that triangle. So remember before we had most people at the bottom getting the most expensive intervention first. What we say now is, why don't we prepare for anticipated performance difficulties with policy and universal design, allow people to take what they need when they need it, because as well, people change throughout their working life, and have that available to them straight away. If that, and those accommodations are free or low cost, the support that you do end up giving to those with more complex needs who do go on to having a need for one-to-one support through coaching or assistive tech training, workplace needs assessments or diagnosis, can more effectively be directed to those smaller number of individuals. So everybody gets the help that they need at the time that they need it, and those with the more complex needs end up getting the more expensive but tailored support. And how do we do that? We do that by rolling out what we believe is a model that allows for the first time everybody to enter self-referral data about themselves and their experience at work on a platform that does not ask for diagnostic information, so it's safe from a data perspective, but allows everybody to instantly understand their visual profile, the things that they're good at and the things that they struggle with, and then instantly gives them, from a library of over 450 tried and tested strategies, some things that they can put into play within half an hour of reading their report for free. Now, the platform that we've created has a psychometric questionnaire, which is 66 questions on average, takes people 10 minutes to complete. They get an instant report and they get access to a strategy sorter. So this is really the kind of the voice, if you like, of the strategies is a coaching voice. We're very famous for our coaching support for neurodivergent individuals, and we've packed all of that information into this product, which is called the Genius Finder. And the strategy sorter looks at the types of strategies that would support the areas of challenge that a person has and aligns them to things like behaviour and process, thinking and emotions, and environment and sensory. And it gives them a bunch of different ideas that they can immediately put in practice. They don't need to ask for policy that changes, they don't need to ask for permission, and they don't, on the most part, need to ask for any budget. And if you've already got some things in place that you're doing, you can just loop these into your existing provision to make sure the right people get the right things. Because you know what, when you ask somebody who's neurodivergent, what do you need? When I had my diagnosis of dyslexia, I kind of thought, well, I probably need something to help me with reading. But what I didn't really realise was I also struggled with self-organising. And I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have naturally put that as one of my challenge areas. This really brings to life the whole person across 13 criteria and helps them understand the things that they're good at and the things they struggle with. It's completely confidential to them, but as a business, you see an aggregated, anonymized data group once 10 or more people have done it. So that helps you start to make decisions at business level. And this is where we get that data lens coming in. So let me just show you a couple of things about the strategy sorter. You can run this on your mobile, on an iPad, on your desktop. It's a web-based app, so it will just perform on any device. And you go into the Strategy Explorer and it allows you to look at your strengths, your competencies in your areas of development. And it allows you to pick the strategies and make your own personalised action plan that you can work through on your own, or you can use it as a coaching companion and people have a kind of a coach that runs alongside the plan and helps them work through the strategies. So instead of just phoning up and getting some coaching, you can have this within the framework of this particular tool, allowing everybody to be able to work at their best. And really what we want is everyone to have access to this, not just the people who have got the different neurotypes, because we all change and we all need support at some point in our lives, whether that's because of what we've gone through or the life stage that we're at. And I'll just finish off. I won't talk too much about Genius Within because I'm sure you can look and find out more about us should you wish to. We are a CIC. We're a majority neurodivergent organisation, with a quarter of us identifying as disabled and nearly a quarter experiencing a mental health condition. High level of intersectionality across the areas that I mentioned before. And this is the point that I wanted to show you, this heat map. And this is the heat map that you have access to as an organisation. You can start to decide. You can run it at a team level and see how your team is working. You remember right at the beginning, we talked about teams working when you've got neurotypical or specialist and generalist thinkers. Well, this will help you understand where your skill gaps are, help you make decisions about future planning for training, understand where you might want to recruit into particular areas, and help you also with universal design and understanding at a system level what you can put in place to really support individuals or teams that may not be performing in areas you might expect them to. So the larger the bubble, the more people have scored. The smaller the bubble, the fewer people have scored. And the range of bubbles shows you where you've got people with strengths and similarly people who are experiencing challenge areas, which is the orange arrow there. So I'll finish up with that. I've taken double the time that you said that I had. There's some more information. I will share all of this with you. Plenty of research from the Centre for Neurodiversity, which Nancy, our founder, is a co-director of. And also we'd highly recommend a book if any of you are practicing coaching or want to support coaches inside your organisation. That was written by Professor Al McDowell and Dr. Nancy Doyle. And that is me done.
Fabulous. And actually, I didn't plan for someone else, so because I had a feeling that this would be a 30-minute talk, but I think it's absolutely worth it, because before you came, we were talking with people about disclosures from their personal point of view. And one thing, some of the things that you touched on there, and I think the most important thing that you said is that we don't ask people to change. We are creating a system where we are preparing and anticipating for differences, anticipating for difficulties. And I think that's the whole point of it. It's like you're doing it in a data-driven way that's helping organizations to identify skills gaps within some of the teams. And also along, it was, I've shared the links there for people to find the Genius Finder Pro and your organization. There's some of the things there about communication or social skills, or I don't know if it was in your talk at NADEX or I've heard it maybe on your website again, but somebody was like, I'm just not great at the financial side of things, And so what we've done is we've got someone else to take over that role, because that was my area of weakness. And now we've all identified, I'm not great at that. Stick me into the talks, to the networking events, because that's your strength. So when we can push people towards their strengths and accommodate or, support on the weaknesses, better all around.
Yeah, I mean, we did the Genius Finder internally when we'd created it, and we found that our managers all, most of them, were poor around financial understanding, and we're asking them to budget, and our budgets weren't very good, and we were like, oh, okay, that's why, because they can't do it. So instead of us berating them and saying, well, you should do better, once we understood that's actually a difficulty, what we could do is do some very prescriptive training. And we used some different methodologies to show people who liked visual learning, and we went through and we recorded it so people could watch it more times, and we used real life examples so it was relevant. And actually our process for doing our budget this year has been very much more smooth, very much more accurate, and a better positive experience. And we can't all be good at everything, and it would be a misnomer if we said that we were. So, and I know we live in a bubble and not all organizations are like that. But what we say is when you have a neurodivergent employee, you get the strengths, and we don't believe in the superhero narrative, right? So it's not a superpower, but you do have things you're better at doing, but you have things you're worse at doing, and we can't cut ourselves in half. I can't just come to work with the things I'm better at doing and leave the things I'm not so good at doing at home. It doesn't work like that. You get the all of me. So you get my ability to solve a problem, but you also get the fact that it takes me probably twice as long to read a long document as somebody else. And you're just going to have to put up with that, because if you want that, if you want the problem solving, you're going to have to understand that I come with some areas of difficulty, and I can have my text to read and read to and read and write text assistive software to help me do that, but it will still take me a bit longer.
Yeah, look, I think that you're just going to have to put up with it. Yeah, quoting you there, Amy, and that's the great thing is you being CEO of Genius Within and being within that bubble is that within that organization you already have that mindset. You know, and I suppose that's what a lot of people are here for as well, and part of the network is how do we get that mindset throughout the organization.
Yeah.
And that'll take, but I think by having data-driven solutions, measurable things that can help us prove the point, you know, pushes the agenda forward. And so I think that what you're doing is absolutely amazing, and you're going to return to us in almost 30 minutes for a much deeper dive chat with Dr. Richard Purcell, the founder at CareScribe. And so if anybody has questions for Jacqui or about the Genius Finder Pro, or more questions about neurodiversity and some of all of the amazing data things that she pointed at, she will be back in 30 minutes. So feel free to drop off, or you can just actually
I'll just turn my
turn
camera
off your camera and your microphone, grab a cup of tea and a Kit Kat, and she'll return to us. And now it's up to me to follow that, Jacqui. So I don't know if I'll be able to, because some people. Oh, go ahead. You can drop off. I'll just keep talking. Or yeah, just close the camera. So